It starts with flashing lights, the roar of engines, and a split-second decision that changes everything. Motorcycle police officers live on the edge every single day, weaving through traffic at high speeds, chasing down criminals, and putting themselves in danger to protect the public. But when things go wrong on two wheels, the results are often catastrophic. Over the years, some of the most brutal and heartbreaking police motorcycle crashes have not only shocked communities, but also raised questions about safety, training, and the risks these officers take. Today we're looking at 5 of the most devastating motorcycle police crash deaths ever recorded.
He just ran in the back of a car.
It was just after 7 p.m. on December 26, 2022, when a Georgia State Patrol trooper lit up his lights for what should have been a routine stop. A black Kawasaki motorcycle had a broken rear tail light and a suspended license. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary, but the rider had other plans. Sterile 25 coming up Burton Road. It's going to be a black motorcycle. He's taking off today. With those words, the chase began. The biker swerved violently through traffic, tearing down the road, headlights blurring past as innocent drivers tried to move out of the way. What no one could predict was just how quickly this pursuit would turn deadly. 10, 50, he just ran the back of a car. In a flash, the Kawasaki slammed into the rear of a white Kia Spectra. The impact threw the rider off the motorcycle and onto the road with bone-shattering force. As dust and debris settled, the trooper rushed in, kneeling beside the crumpled body. "Can you hear me? Stay with me, buddy." For a few agonizing moments, it looked like the man might hang on. His body twitched, faint breaths rattled in his chest, but the grip on life was slipping fast. The trooper spoke to him desperately, trying to anchor him to the world. Yet no amount of words or first aid could stop what was already happening. By the time backup arrived, the truth was undeniable. The rider was gone. His name would later be revealed as 48-year-old Stephen Wilson, a man with a past as dangerous as the ride he had just taken. Wilson wasn't just some reckless biker. He had been a fugitive for over 6 months, wanted by the U.S. Marshals after escaping federal prison. His record read like a dark history book: burglary, forgery, fraud, battery, even cruelty to children. More than 24 arrests in Chatham County alone. He had once been caught with semi-automatic pistols despite being a convicted felon, sentenced to nearly a decade in federal prison. And yet, somehow, he always slipped back through the cracks, back onto the streets. But on this December night, his run came to a violent end in the middle of Ogeechee Road. The woman inside the Kia, shaken but miraculously unhurt, would go home. Stephen Wilson would not. In the end, the flashing lights faded, the wreckage was cleared, and traffic moved on. But for those who witnessed it, the trooper, the bystanders, even the drivers forced to swerve out of his path, the sight of Stephen Wilson's final desperate moments will never be forgotten. It was the afternoon of September 4th, 2023. Labor Day in rural Independence County, Arkansas. The highways were alive with families heading home, the kind of day that should have ended quietly. But for one man, 63-year-old Michael Owens, it would be his final ride. Just before 4 p.m., Arkansas State Police Trooper Brandon Trewin spotted a gray sedan speeding recklessly down U.S. Highway 167. He flipped on his lights, sirens blaring as he accelerated to give chase. Witnesses recall the piercing sound echoing across the quiet stretch of road as the patrol car closed in. But in the chaos of that pursuit, fate intervened in the most brutal way imaginable. Owens, riding his 2000 Yamaha motorcycle, had just turned left from Pfeiffer Road onto Highway 167, heading southbound. He wasn't running, he wasn't speeding, he was just another driver sharing the road. But as he crossed the lanes, his path aligned directly with the state trooper's Dodge Charger, surging forward with lights flashing and engine roaring. Trewin swerved hard, pushing his cruiser toward the right shoulder in a desperate attempt to avoid impact. But there was no time, no space, no chance. The front of the patrol car struck Owens' motorcycle with crushing force. The bike shattered, metal and glass scattering across the asphalt as the 63-year-old was thrown violently to the ground. Bystanders froze. For a moment, the only sounds were the siren's wail and the hiss of broken machinery. Trooper Truen stumbled out of his damaged vehicle, injured but alive. Owens lay motionless on the roadway, his ride and his life brought to a sudden, devastating end. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but nothing could be done. Michael Owens was pronounced dead from his injuries. Truen was taken to White River Medical Center, treated for minor injuries, and released the next day. For the families driving home that afternoon, it was a sight they will never forget. A patrol car, a mangled motorcycle, and the haunting reminder of how fast ordinary moments can turn into tragedy. One man died doing something as routine as making a left turn. Another will carry the weight of that collision for the rest of his life.
He's on foot. He crashed out.
Get on the ground!
He's on foot. He crashed out.
He's on fire!
Allen and Silver Street.
It was just after 1 a.m. on October 13th, 2022, when the streets of Little Rock, Arkansas were quiet. Most of the city slept, but Arkansas State Police Trooper Joseph Killian was wide awake, patrolling the dark highways. That was when he spotted it. A black Kawasaki ZXJ motorcycle cutting through the night, no license plate attached. A small violation, but one that demanded attention. Killian switched on his blue lights, expecting the rider to pull over, maybe offer an excuse, maybe receive a citation. Instead, what should have been a routine stop instantly spiraled into something far darker. The moment the lights flashed, the rider leaned forward and twisted the throttle. The Kawasaki screamed to life, bolting ahead like a bullet in the night. In seconds, it was no longer about a missing plate. It was a chase. Broadway West, northbound speeds 80. Killian's voice echoed over the radio, calm but tight with focus. The sound of engines roared through the empty streets as the motorcycle tore through red lights and intersections, weaving between the occasional late-night driver who barely had time to react. The rider, later identified as 38-year-old Christopher Gaylor of Alexander, Arkansas, wasn't just running, he was flying. His motorcycle darted across lanes, pushed to its limits. At one point, troopers estimated his speed reached 120 miles per hour. He swerved into oncoming traffic, forcing startled drivers to yank their steering wheels to avoid head-on collisions. To anyone watching, it was pure chaos. A man who seemed to have nothing left to lose, and state troopers who couldn't, and wouldn't, let him slip away into the darkness. Backup closed in. Trooper Austin Duncan joined the pursuit as Gaylor veered off the interstate and cut sharply into a Kroger parking lot. There, the motorcycle jumped onto sidewalks, buzzing past storefronts, the engine howling as sparks shot up from the pavement. Troopers tried to box him in, but Gaylor had the desperation of someone running from far more than a traffic stop. He slipped away again, vanishing into the narrow space between two houses. And then, everything unraveled. Gaylor leapt from his still-moving motorcycle, abandoning the bike as it skidded across grass and concrete. He sprinted into the shadows on foot. Duncan swerved to avoid hitting him, his cruiser smashing into a parked vehicle with a sickening crunch of metal. But Gaylor wasn't free yet. "Get on the ground! I'll shoot!" Voices shouted into the night. Duncan raised his taser and fired. The first jolt seemed to do nothing. Gaylor staggered, still trying to run. Duncan fired again, and that was when the unthinkable happened. Sparks erupted. In an instant, flames roared to life, engulfing Gaylor in a blazing inferno. His backpack, unknown to the troopers, was filled with gasoline. A simple spark had turned him into a human torch. The night exploded in fire. Gaylor stumbled, screaming, his body ablaze. Troopers froze for half a second in disbelief before the horror set in. "He's on fire! Extinguisher! Extinguisher!" The desperate shouts filled the air as Duncan sprinted back to his cruiser. He grabbed the extinguisher, rushing to spray down the flames as the sickening smell of burning fuel and melted fabric coated the scene. The fire hissed and sputtered out. Gaylor collapsed. His jacket melted into his skin, his body a seared wreck. Officers moved fast, cutting away the burned fabric, holding him down as paramedics arrived. Against all odds, he was still alive. Later at the hospital, his father revealed a chilling detail. Gaylor had been carrying a jug of gasoline in that backpack. According to him, his son was delivering it to a friend who had run out of fuel. Whether that story was truth or excuse, the result was undeniable. It had nearly cost Gaylor his life. For weeks, he fought through the agony of burns, undergoing treatment at the Arkansas Children's Burn Unit. He eventually recovered, scarred but breathing. In court, he was sentenced to 7 years of probation. On paper, he had survived his brush with death, but fate wasn't done with Christopher Gaylor. Less than a year later, he died in a car crash, closing the final chapter of a life defined by reckless decisions and close calls. This chase, born from something as small as a missing license plate, had turned into one of the most surreal and shocking moments in Arkansas State Police history. A man, literally set ablaze by the consequences of his own choices, became a reminder of how thin the line is between control and catastrophe. And as troopers cleared the scene that October morning, the flames extinguished and the chaos fading, one truth lingered in the air like smoke. In the world of high-speed pursuits, it only takes a single spark for everything to burn.
A motorcyclist is fighting for life tonight after fleeing from police and then crashing in Dianella. Officers had tried to stop the rider about 20 minutes before he slammed into two.
It was March 2012 in Glen Forest, Western Australia, when a quiet night turned into a scene of horror. On that night, 29-year-old Aaron Genevese was tearing down the road on a motorcycle, a man already carrying the weight of too many wrong turns. He had no license. He was already suspended from driving. The plates on his bike were fake, and in his pockets he carried cannabis, while in his veins ran a cocktail of alcohol, amphetamines, and methamphetamine. Levels so high, coroners later described them as typical of drivers arrested for the most chaotic and reckless behavior on the road. Aaron was not just riding illegally, he was riding like someone with nothing left to lose. When two officers first spotted him that evening, he was pushing nearly 100 kilometers an hour in a zone marked for 80. The decision to chase him came in an instant. Their lights flashed, their sirens wailed, and what should have been a routine traffic stop escalated into a high-speed pursuit that quickly spiraled beyond control. The chase cut across darkened roads, engines roaring, tires tearing into asphalt. Residents later described the sound as deafening, like something ripping through the night at a speed no human could hope to control. As the pursuit pushed closer to an intersection, it seemed for a moment that Aaron might surrender. Witnesses said they saw him brake hard, the motorcycle's lights dipping as if preparing to stop. The officer trailing him believed the danger had ended, that maybe Aaron, realizing there was nowhere left to run, had given in. But then came the twist. In one split-second decision, Aaron leaned forward, twisted the throttle, and instead of halting, he launched himself into the path of a Toyota Prado coming across the intersection. The impact was as violent as it was final. The motorcycle crumpled, metal shrieking against steel. The force of the collision threw Aaron nearly 10 meters through the air, his body slamming back onto the road with a sickening weight. His neck fractured instantly. Witnesses could only stand frozen, describing later how it happened so quickly, so violently, that by the time they processed the sound of the crash, Aaron was already lying motionless on the asphalt. But the brutality of the crash itself was only part of the story. What followed raised even more unsettling questions. A post-mortem revealed Aaron's blood carried a dangerous mix of alcohol, cannabis, and methamphetamine, a toxic combination that almost guaranteed poor judgment and impulsive risk-taking. On paper, it looked like an inevitable ending for a man spiraling out of control. Yet the coronial inquest revealed a deeper complication. The officers chasing him had breached Western Australia Police's emergency driving policy. That policy, meant to prevent needless risk during pursuits, had clear boundaries. But when Internal Affairs reviewed the case, they determined the officer had crossed those boundaries. And yet, instead of charges or disciplinary measures, the officer was given only a letter of corrective advice, essentially a formal reminder of his obligations. The details of the policy breach were suppressed, hidden away from public view by Coroner Ross Fogliani. To the families watching, and to the public hearing this story unfold, it felt like a silence louder than any siren. Neighbors who lived near the intersection recalled the moments before the crash with chilling clarity. One man described hearing an exceedingly loud noise as the motorcycle roared past, far too fast for any normal rider to control. Others said it was over in seconds. One heartbeat, they heard the bike scream down the road. The next heartbeat, it was just wreckage scattered across the street and a young man dead. For the community, the questions would not fade. Did Aaron's reckless choices alone write his fate? Or did the pursuit, pushed past the line of policy, play a role in steering him toward death? Was this a tragedy of one man's defiance, or a system too quick to give chase? The coroner stopped short of placing full blame on police, but the suppressed details and the lack of serious consequence left behind a sense of unease. In the end, the story of Aaron Genevese became less about one man's crash and more about a haunting reality. That a single split-second decision, his decision to flee, their decision to pursue, collided in the worst way possible. All that was left on that road in Glen Forest was the silence after impact, the echo of what had just happened, and the reminder that some endings are not just tragic, but brutally inevitable. It was a warm July afternoon in 2022 when the roads around Gateshead, just outside the bustling metro center, were shaken by the kind of crash no one ever expects, a crash involving not just a motorcycle and its riders, but a marked police car with blue lights flashing. What should have been a routine moment of urgency for an officer on duty became a nightmare that would claim a life and spark questions that linger to this day. On the motorcycle that afternoon were Ronald and Muriel Pinkney, a couple in their 70s. To anyone watching, they seemed fragile but steady, a pair who had spent a lifetime together. Muriel, 74, rode as a passenger, trusting in the same kind of everyday safety we all take for granted when we step outside. But that trust would be shattered in an instant. As the police vehicle entered Dunstan Road, the collision was sudden and brutal. Metal struck metal, and in the chaos, both Ronald and Muriel were thrown into the road. Ronald, 77, suffered catastrophic fractures to his leg, hip, and pelvis. Muriel's injuries were even worse. She was rushed to hospital where doctors fought to stabilize her, but despite everything, her body could not withstand the trauma. Days later, she slipped away, and this was not just another road accident. The driver of the police car was one of their own, PC Mark Roberts, a 56-year-old officer. The Independent Office for Police Conduct immediately launched an investigation, interviewing Roberts under criminal caution. The seriousness of the situation was undeniable. The question was no longer just about how the crash had happened. It was whether a police officer's own driving had crossed the line into criminality. The results of that investigation were damning. Roberts was charged. He admitted to causing death by careless driving and causing serious injury to Ronald by careless driving. He denied the more severe charges of dangerous driving, but the damage had already been done. For the Pinkneys, the labels of careless or dangerous mattered little, because the outcome was the same. Muriel was gone. Imagine it. Two elderly people riding together, unaware their lives were about to collide with a patrol car in the most literal and devastating sense. Imagine being Ronald, surviving but broken, carrying not just the weight of his injuries, but the memory of watching his wife's final days in a hospital bed, knowing her life ended not at the hands of some reckless civilian, but because of the very people sworn to protect them. This wasn't just a crash. It was a betrayal of trust. A reminder that blue lights do not make anyone invincible on the road. And when the investigation closed in, when headlines carried Muriel's name, the silence that followed was deafening. A pensioner's life ended, a husband left shattered, and a police officer forced to admit his actions had cost a woman her future. The brutality wasn't just in the crash. It was in the realization that even those trained to protect can make mistakes so devastating they destroy families forever.